Hong Kong is heading towards a record 17th week of protests, with hundreds of people taking to the streets yet again. Rallies continued in the city this morning after what was yet another violent night, marking the anniversary of the 2014 umbrella movement. As you can see on your screen, security was beefed up across Hong Kong in the light of China's National Day, which falls on the 1st of October. Incidentally, Chief Executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, will be out of town for the National Day celebrations, triggering speculation of a possible confrontation on the streets. Yesterday, rallies were marred by violence, with the police using tear gas, water cannons and pepper sprays. Protesters blocked roads near the local headquarters of China's People's Liberation Army, triggering a response from the police. Protesters dressed in all-black attire used umbrellas to take cover from the water cannons as violence once again became the norm on the streets of Hong Kong. The crowd was celebrating the anniversary of the umbrella movement. Remember, the umbrella movement of 2014 saw students demanding universal suffrage to elect their own leader. Needless to say, Beijing back then responded to those protests with an iron fist. Thousands gathered at the Tamar Park to commemorate the occasion. Lenin walls have also made a comeback to the city in 2014. Lenin walls were composed of post-it notes demanding democracy in Hong Kong. It had become a popular method of public outrage back then. Meanwhile, prominent democracy activist Joshua Wong has announced his decision to run for the local district council. Wong has termed running for office a moderate and peaceful way to express his political beliefs.
I hereby announce solemnly that I am running for the office of the South Horizon West constituency in the upcoming district council election. It's a decision came after careful consideration.
Frankly speaking, running for office is the most moderate, peaceful, and rational way to express our political belief. If they block young activists just like me to run for office, they need to pay the price.
And we're now being joined by our reporter Grace Lee, straight from the streets of Hong Kong. Grace, thank you so much for being with us. Talk to us. We have entered the 17th weekend of protests in Hong Kong. It was a day filled with protests. How is the situation on the ground days before China's National Day?
Well, I'm here in Hong Kong city center, and if you take a look behind me, you can see that police have swarmed this area. Earlier in the day, it was completely overrun by protesters up until the point where police kind of stormed the area, pinning several protesters to the ground. And we saw some pretty violent images, several rounds of tear gas fired, and of course water cannons, and protesters hitting back by throwing petrol bombs. And I've heard that 2 different metro stations have been closed today due to fires caused by those petrol bombs. And the images that we've seen throughout the day of the protests here have been particularly violent. And that's concerning, considering the fact that Hong Kongers say that this is just kind of a preview for what might happen on Tuesday, which is China's National Day, a big holiday in Beijing. And Hong Kongers say that they're going to mark that holiday by protesting here and showing Beijing that Beijing has to listen and that they have a message that they will not stop fighting for their freedoms here. Now, today's march in particular was what they called a fight against totalitarianism. And it was a march that wasn't just set here, but around the world. There were 72 cities that raised their hand to participate in a bid to show their solidarity with the protests that are happening here. Based on the fact that we've seen some pretty heavy violence here today, and of course there were protests yesterday that saw some violence as well, police will likely be bracing for another day of heavy clashes with protesters on Tuesday.
That was Grace Lee, our correspondent, getting us that report from the streets of Hong Kong. Thank you, Grace, for joining us. Away from that, thousands have rallied in Sydney and Taipei to support the Hong Kong pro-democracy supporters. More than 1,000 people kicked off anti-totalitarianism demonstrations in Sydney and around 2,000 people in Taipei as a global day to extend support to the protesters in Hong Kong. The protesters in Sydney were spotted holding signs that read "Save Hong Kong" and "Stop Tyranny," while others carried yellow umbrellas and handed out paper cranes in scenes that played out in other major cities across Australia as well. Meanwhile, in Taipei, people dressed in black gathered amid heavy rains outside the parliament to extend solidarity to the democratic movement of Hong Kong. Similar rallies are being held in over 40 cities worldwide to extend solidarity to Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement that began this year in the month of June.